Please welcome our first performers, Back in Time, otherwise known as Frank and Mary Sweet.
This is a Veterans Day story of Florida history as told by an engineer. Now, if you went to the movies during World War II, you'd see that they had a black and white newsreel that was shown before the main feature. And one of those newsreels showed the Marines landing on the beach of Guadalcanal. And in the newsreel, you could see these ships offshore on the horizon, and these steel boxes coming across the water towards the beach. And as they came through the surf, you could see that they were throwing up fountains of water behind them because they were on caterpillar treads. And the treads were churning furiously, throwing up water behind them, driving them through the surf. And as they hit the beach, you expected ramps to fall down and Marines to come out, but no. Instead, the caterpillar treads simply dug into the sand and they rolled right up the beach and into the jungle. Now, those vehicles were called landing vehicle tracked by the Navy. But the guys inside them called them Florida Alligators. And this is the story of how that machine came to be invented. Now, the story starts out with the building of the Brooklyn Bridge. It will take us through the Dewey Decimal System, the two places called Lake Placid, the deadliest hurricane in Florida, and a very strange inventor in Clearwater. Now, John Roebling had just turned 16 when his mother finished building the Brooklyn Bridge. Actually, the project had been started by his grandfather, but he died very quickly when the construction started as a result of a construction accident. His father, George Roebling, took over, but then he became permanently disabled and bedridden as a result of a construction accident. And so his mother, Emily, took over the project, and she became project manager and chief engineer, and she completed the Brooklyn Bridge in 1883. John had just turned 16 when he graduated from high school. He went to Rensselaer, like his father and grandfathers before him, to become an engineer. Now, Emily and her husband George had invented, during the building of the bridge, a way of making, inexpensive way of making strong steel cables, that could, wires that could be bound into cables for suspension bridges. And when John graduated from Rensselaer, he expanded the business and began providing cables for suspension bridges around the world. And today, if you go anywhere in the world at these large suspension bridges, including the Bridge of Forth in Edinburgh, for example, or the Golden Gate in San Francisco, you will see they are held up by Roebling cables. And so the family became very, very, very wealthy. Well, now, John Roebling, he married a lady who had asthma, unfortunately, and so she liked to spend the summers in the Adirondack Mountains where she could breathe clean mountain air. And so John's best friend, Melville Dewey, the guy who invented the Dewey Decimal System, those numbers that are on the back of books in the libraries, well, they bought some land in the Adirondacks on a place called Lake Placid, and they built a resort there for people to go up and spend the summer. And it was very successful and very popular. And the problem was that it's only good for the summer because the Adirondacks are snowed in the wintertime. And so they looked for a place to build a resort for people for the winter. And they found a place in Florida, a place called Lake Stearns. And so they bought land at Lake Stearns. In fact, they bought the whole town. And they renamed it Lake Placid. And so now there are two Lake Placids, one in the Adirondacks for the summer crowd, and one here in Florida for the snowbirds. Now, John Roebling and his wife had a son named Donald Roebling, and when he graduated high school, off he went to Rensselaer to become an engineer like his father and his grandfathers and his great-grandfathers. But sad to report, Donald Roebling did not have a head for mathematics or science or anything like that, in fact, any kind of study. And he dropped out of college in the first month of his first semester. And what's worse than that, he really couldn't get a job. He was a very strange guy. He could not hold a conversation. He could not look you in the eye. He could not converse with you for any length of time. But as I said, the family was very wealthy, and they discovered that Donald liked to work with his hands. He could make things. He could make little gadgets. And so they built an estate for him called Spottiswoode in Clearwater on the Peninsula. And there in the back of the estate, they built a complete mechanics laboratory and workshop where he could invent things and do things to his heart's content. And he made gadgets that would spin and whir and buzz and move about. Well, in 1928, the deadliest hurricane ever hit the Florida came in. It was a Category 5 and slammed into the coast of Palm Beach County at the north end. And a 20-foot storm surge rolled over Jupiter Beach and Jupiter Town and Jupiter Farms and Indian Town and all the way to Lake Okeechobee. And there, a big chunk of the Atlantic Ocean dropped into Lake Okeechobee and flooded it out in all directions, drowning thousands of farms and homes and villages all around Lake Okeechobee. Well now, all of the local civic leaders like Dewey and Roebling, they marshaled their employees to try and rescue the unfortunates that had been stranded by the flood. But they couldn't get in there. Because it wasn't just water that had flooded out of Lake Okeechobee. It was mud. It was mud that in some places was 10 to 15 feet deep. And it was too thick for the airboats to go through. But it was too thin for vehicles. In fact, you couldn't walk on it. If you tried to, you would sink in without a trace, like quicksand. And so they couldn't get in there. And as a result, 2,000 Floridians perished as a result of that terrible storm. Well, John Roebling never really got over it. But he turned to his son in Clearwater and said, look, make something of yourself. You're inventing things. Invent a humanitarian rescue vehicle that we can use the next time we have a hurricane. A vehicle that can cross open water, the ocean, the seas, the land, the swamps, the whatever. It can cover anything. And so Roebling set out to do that. Donald Roebling set out, it took 9 years. And his first prototype was a steel box, a watertight steel box with a motor inside and Caterpillar treads on the outside. And he took it down to the beach out to Honeymoon Island, and it promptly sank. So then he built a second prototype. And he managed to get out to Honeymoon Island. And Calawisi Island, when we got back, it didn't have the power to get up the beach. And the third one could get out to the islands and up the beach, but it couldn't get over the swamps behind where the I-75 spur is today. But finally, in early 1938, he had it working. He called it the Florida Alligator. And he would drive around St. Petersburg and Largo and Clearwater and that thing, and he became quite well known. And one day, in early 1938, a photographer from Life magazine came by. And he saw this, and he thought that was the coolest thing. And so he persuaded the editors of Life magazine to do a feature story on Roebling's Florida Alligator. And so the October 4th issue, 1938, October 4th issue of Life magazine, there on the cover, big as life, is Donald Roebling driving his alligator down the streets of Clearwater. Well now, at that time, there was a major in the U.S. Marine Corps by the name of John Califf. And he read Life magazine. And he saw this and said, hey, we can use that in the Marines. Because you see, the Marines have always landed ships onto beaches. But up until that time, they'd always done it in rowboats. And Califf thought to himself, this is a lot easier than a rowboat, and it's a lot safer. This is a steel box that you're in. And so he took the magazine to his bosses, to superiors in the Navy. And if you've ever met a Navy admiral, you can predict what they would have said. And that was, rowboats were good enough for our grandparents, and they're good enough for me, and they should be good enough for you. And they didn't want to have anything to do with this. Well, Califf didn't give up. He continued trying to persuade people, and the next leave that he had from the military, he actually went to Clearwater. And he introduced himself to Donald Roebling. And he explained why the Marine Corps needed his Florida Alligator. And Roebling was utterly horrified. He said, this is a humanitarian rescue vehicle that I invented at the behest of my father because of the tragedy of the hurricane. It's not meant for war. You can't use it for warfare. And so Roebling essentially threw Califf out. Califf went back to Virginia. He didn't give up. He continued talking to other folks, other guys in the military. And finally, a fellow by the name of Emil Moses, who had just been promoted to Brigadier General, took an interest and said, how we can use this thing. The problem is, you don't know how to persuade Donald Roebling. We need to work out a presentation, a pitch, where we can somehow convince him of this. Now, there's no point in appealing to flattery, because we're not really sure that he can understand what we're saying. Like I said, he was a very strange guy, a very retired guy, and like I said, he couldn't even maintain eye contact. So there's no point in trying to appeal to flattery, and there's certainly no point in offering him any money. You see, the actual memos that they sent each other at the time time are still around, you can read it. And in the words of John Caleb, Major John Caleb, there's no point in offering money because the Roebling family has so much money that any more income would simply be an embarrassment to them. So what we have to do, said the brigadier, is we have to appeal to his patriotism. And so they put together a pitch, a presentation, when with their assistants, the general and the colonel and their entourage, they all went to Clearwater. And they went to Roebling's place in Clearwater. And they flew flags and they waved flags and they talked about mom and apple pie and patriotism. And a song had just come out. And it was called God Bless America.
Sing with us.
Join us if you want. Anyway, Roebling was convinced, and he agreed to cooperate. And so they asked him to make 5 prototypes to take a test back in Virginia. And he did. He went out back to his workshop, and he assembled 5 copies of the Florida Alligator. Now you have to understand that no 2 of these things were alike, because he didn't have blueprints or plans or engineering drawings or anything like that. He made these things by sheer inspiration. But off they went to Virginia, and the Marine Corps loved them. And so they came back with a purchase order for 200 alligators, handed it to Roebling with the understanding that once it was delivered, they had another order for 2,000 behind that. Well, now there's no way he's going to make 200 of these things in his backyard. And so he was trying to figure out what to do, but just up the road from Clearwater, from Spottiswoode, is Dunedin. And in Dunedin, there was a small factory called Food Machinery Corporation. And they would make crop sprayers and orange squeezers for the citrus industry. So they worked with metal. So Roebling drove his Alligator into the parking lot, went inside, talked to the engineers, and said, "Can you make that thing out there? Because I got an order from the Marine Corps for 200 of these things." And so they talked to management and said they'd take a shot at it. So the engineer said, "Yeah, let's have the blueprints and we'll try to get started." And of course, Roebling said, "Blueprints? You got nothing like that." And so they wound up taking this thing apart right there in the parking lot, piece by piece, and making drawings of the pieces, figuring out how to make them, how to put it back together again. And they did make the 200. And those are the ones that you see in the movie Tone newsreel, landing at Guadalcanal. And that's my story of Florida history as told by an engineer.
Awesome.
For 2 of the founding members of the Telltale